Jonathan Ray, welcome back to the Single Track Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Finn. I'm back. I won another golden ticket. Woohoo.
I was just going to say, I was racking my brain, and there's going to be somebody out there in the audience who will fact check me, but you have to be one of the few people ever to secure 2 golden tickets in a single calendar year with 2022 Bandera and 2022 Javelina. Does anybody else come to mind off the top of your head?
Yeah, I was curious about that. I didn't do any research on it, so I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to throw it out to the audience at some point. I mean, I'm sure there's people that have done like back-to-back Black Canyons or back-to-back Banderas, but pretty amazing that you did this within a 10-month span and got into Western States twice the hard way. How are you feeling right now?
Good. Yeah, I think the recovery from this race is like as expected in between like 100K and 100 mile. Like I was thinking of Javelina as like a bridge distance or at least effort between those two. And so, yeah, as expected, I think.
Right on. Well, I thought we had an awesome chat back in January post Bandera, but you and I were talking offline. I think that there's just going to be a lot of new listeners this time around that are going to get to hear your story. And I think in addition to being a runner, you're fascinating from multiple different angles. And I think the first place I want to have a conversation is around social media, because we're seeing many elite athletes, or at least more and more elite athletes, take a public stand sort of against these traditional platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Claire Gallagher and Arlen Glick, we've had them on the podcast. They've both taken vocal either stands against it or just opting out altogether. And with the exception of Strava, you're hard to find on there. I'm not even sure you exist on Instagram, for example. And I guess I'm wondering, like, is that intentional? What are your thoughts on these platforms? Like, do you prefer to be out of the spotlight? Talk about that.
Definitely somewhat intentional. I'm not a big social media advocate, at least. I think what a lot of people say about it causing a lot of the mental health problems in the US is probably true. And for me personally, like, I notice my brain working worse when I spend any time on social media. So I'm like, okay, I'll do less of that. How about, I guess maybe like I feel like my introduction to social media, like back in college, like it was useful to give family and friend updates. Like I went to college and like, I want to tell people, hey, I joined this fraternity, or like I won my baseball game or something like that. And it was like fun to be still connected with friends and family through that. But now it's grown to the place where, like, if I'm putting stuff out there for the general public, not for people I know, then it becomes like a whole different world of branding and marketing and things. And then I would be comparing my own posting to professional people whose jobs it is to do this kind of advertising. And when you asked me as a kid what I wanted to be when I grow up, it was not like an advertiser or a marketing person. Like I wanted to be a professional athlete, and like I would have preferred the NBA or MLB. And so like ultra running is definitely a consolation competition. And then like I wanted to solve math problems because like I like doing math, and baseball statistics were fun, and being an engineer was cool. So I like have set up my career to do that. Like I have an engineering degree from MIT and a PhD in material science. And that's what I'm doing with my career, is like engineering and math stuff. And then I get to be an athlete in addition to that as I've grown up. But I definitely am not interested in like becoming a full-time advertising marketing person. So I think both just like lack of enthusiasm for using them because of mixed feelings about its impacts on the world, and then also on myself, and then to some extent just like slow enough on the priority list that I don't have the time or ability to set a vision and then execute on high quality posts or something like that to have a great presence. So yeah,
I think we'll talk about your views and your stances on the environment in a second, but one more question, or two more questions I wanted to ask on this front. The first, do you see any value in using these platforms to share a perspective or to share a lifestyle that you think people would take interest in, and maybe they would want to adopt bits and pieces of it on their own? Like, do you see? Yeah, because I'm trying to take like the opposite side here, just to play devil's advocate. Like, are there any ways you've seen this to be a force for good, and that you have things to say that it would benefit a wide audience to consume?
Definitely. And I would love help being better at doing that. In my professional life, I work at RMI. It's a nonprofit energy think tank. And we have a team dedicated to building electrification, basically converting gas appliances like your furnace and hot water heater and stove to electric versions, because like burning gas in your house is bad for the climate, but also because it's bad for your indoor air quality. And that team has social media managers, and they've done this like big campaign and done tons of promotion and work with influencers to promote cooking with induction stoves instead of gas stoves because they're better, and doing a bunch of research on indoor air quality. And like they've had an incredibly successful set of social media campaigns where they've like gotten tons of attention and views. And that definitely has a huge impact on the world in a positive way, to put those ideas out there and have a great view on it. And I think that doing some of those things in my own life and putting them out there, and those would be useful ideas to advocate for. But then again, that's like a full-time job for like a team of 40 people at RMI to be working behind. And like, I can't really do the same level of quality stuff by myself. So I can contribute to it in my workday, but trying to do it all by myself would be hard. But like, yeah, this year I did the same thing. Like I replaced my gas furnace with an electric heat pump, and my hot water heater with an electric version. And I would love to have promoted those things on social media to tell other people, hey, like burning gas inside your house is terrible for your indoor air quality. It's causing asthma and all these other health impacts. And that's an additional reason to like the climate impacts of burning gas in your house. And so it'd be awesome to be able to put more out there on those views, but yeah, lack of time and support to just like do it myself, I guess.
Okay, side note, offline, we got to talk about these alternative energy options. I'm already kind of brainstorming for my own home here, but it sounds like, I mean, you just said it, like you have this incredibly fulfilling career. You're in a stable place. It doesn't sound like, even though you're having all of this success in the sport, that you need the assistance of sponsors. Like, it's not a must-have. At best, it's like a nice to have. My understanding is that you're currently unsponsored. I saw you wearing some Patagonia gear out there, but I don't want to make any assumptions. Is this something that interests you at all? Like, are there brands out there like Normal or Patagonia that maybe align with the environment that you would be excited to partner with? Or like, do you always want the marketing, the branding side of this sport to be, well outside what you do?
You're right. I don't need a sponsor for like the financial, I don't need a salary out of a sponsorship. And so it would be mostly to try to do more good in the world if I could. And my priorities would be, climate action, promoting diversity and equity and inclusion in sport, mental health support issues, and obviously like high quality products, because running fast is better than not running fast. But yeah, my priorities in finding a sponsor, which I definitely would like to do, because like I would love to have a partner to help me put some more of those ideas out there and get them more widely spread amongst the running community, but all communities too. But yeah, my priority would be working with a brand like that has a mission or a vision that does more than just try to win races.
Right on. Well, I do know that there are a few athlete managers in this arena, and that may even very well work for brands that fit that description. And so hopefully there's a routing mechanism here. This is a serendipity vehicle for future connections. But one more thing before we get into Javelina and your past Western State experiences. We also chatted last time more in depth about your environmental views and your own policy about how to participate in this sport, how to travel to races, the gear you use, etc. before this interview, I just read a book. It's called "We Can't Run Away from This" by a fellow ultra runner, Damian Hall, and he talks about our footprint when it comes to the garments we wear, how we travel, how events are structured, et cetera. Absolutely fascinating. I'll link to it in the show notes. And that kind of renewed my interest for this conversation. Can you talk to the audience about how you think about your footprint in the sport and maybe some of the ways that we are making an impact that are non-obvious that you want to shed light on?
That's a good book recommendation, and I should go read it. But I suppose before having my views tainted or informed, I suppose, more than tainted by other people. I guess like having done some decarbonization modeling for the U.S. specifically, at least, I just think about like where do the largest emissions come from and how am I impacting them? And maybe in like the running world or outdoor industry, people will get a little more narrowly focused on their impact through those actions because that's where their identity is, but they forget about the overall big picture of like emissions in the US. So right now, like the biggest sectors for emissions in the US are one, transportation, like burning gas in your cars and planes, two, electricity generation, three, agriculture, like basically cows being terrible for the world, and then industry after that. And within industry, it's like making steel and making cement are the high emitting industries. And so I think in terms of like producing goods and materials that we're using for sport, like, yeah, we should take into account the impact of those choices. But I think the marginal difference between one brand or another, or like buying 25% more stuff or 25% less stuff, is like so much less important than a lot of the other decisions you can make in your overall life. And so like, yeah, it should inform your decisions, and that's important, but like, don't get too narrow-minded on like the impact through what you're doing with your sport. I think the travel emissions are probably the biggest one that actually are a real factor. And I've traveled to races 3 times this year. Like I went to Bandera in Texas, I went to Western States in California, and then Javelina in Phoenix. And none of them were that far. Like the flight to Phoenix from Denver is less than 2 hours. So the combination of those 3 trips is still less than like 1 trip to Europe. So I would probably pick and choose a little more. And if like it's local, then great. But at some point, you also gotta like live your life to an extent.
Yeah.
Like the definition of sustainable is to meet the needs of today while not compromising the ability to meet the needs of tomorrow. But like the first part, like you still got to meet the needs of today. Like I don't think the solution to climate change or environmental support is like for everyone to dig a hole and go sit in it until the end of their life. Like we still got to do things, and there's still a lot of value to be created. And if there's costs, then like if you're making a decision with costs and benefits, then you should consider the climate costs of any action you're taking. But like it doesn't mean that is infinitely weighted in your decision.
It's funny, I don't want to spoil the book for you, but I just finished reading that Damian Hall book, and I got to admit, it kind of radicalized me. Like I obviously had pro environmental views heading into it, but like after reading all of the sections on how the clothing industry works and how the airline industry works and how the event industry works, it made me want to like go out into my backyard, create like a backyard ultra type course and just run laps around that in perpetuity on shoes that have like 3,000 miles on them, just to like avoid any impact whatsoever, because it seemed like everything is just so incredibly consequential in what we do in making a huge impact. So it's nice to hear your perspective that it is important to think about the future self and our future generations, but also to meet the needs of today. That's I'm going to remember that after this interview.
Yeah, but I hope not everyone takes away from what I just said. Like, oh, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to be irresponsible and not care about my relationship with the world. Should still care.
What are some of the concrete things that you do or that you're just mindful about, like when it comes to travel, for example? Like what are some I don't want to say quick wins or hacks, but like how are you preparing for races and executing races in an environmentally sustainable way that might not be obvious to listeners?
I think like carbon offsets for flights are marginally beneficial and like can maybe do something to counteract the emissions from your flight, as like if that's the largest source of emissions from the trip, then you can do something about it. But at some point you're still like contributing to actual emissions through doing that. We always look for EVs if we can rent them. Turo is this cool rideshare like rental app that's an alternative to rental agencies. So, like a lot of the rental car places don't have great EV options, but if you go through Turo, it's like Airbnb for car rentals, and there's way more EVs on there. So that's where we've gotten our rentals for the last couple of trips we've done. And then I guess like I went to Bandera solo by myself, and so like the number of people that you bring is also a factor. Like in terms of also in addition to the distance, there's a number of like people miles that matter. So for Javelina, my wife Rachel came with me, and that was totally necessary, and I needed her so much. But I didn't bring like a whole squad of like 20 people to throw a big party. If I was going to throw a big party, it was going to be at home afterwards.
Well, I want to talk about Western states too before we get into Javelina. And you got into Western states last year off a golden ticket at Bandera, like you just said. And I'm curious to know like what went well, what went poorly, because I was glued to the live tracker all day. And from what I could observe or tell, you were slowly making your way up the field. I think you got up to as high as like 5th or 4th around the river. And then I think there was an implosion, but everybody was sort of singing your praises in the chat. And I know that Dylan and Corinne on the live stream are giving you some love. And so maybe just talk about how that day went and how it led to you wanting to get back to Javelina and punch your way back in.
Yeah, I did feel a lot of that love actually, both during and afterwards, like seeing messages from people and like people like replaying parts of the live stream for me. And I was like, oh, that is awesome. And it was going so great. And I was in 4th going into Forest Hill, basically at the same time as Vincent Viet and Arlen Glick. We kind of came in together as 4th through 6th. And I was definitely like, I had just passed a bunch of people and I had like visions in my head of like breaking the tape at Western States. And I was like giddy and going nuts and super happy about that. But I think I basically made one major mistake, and that was too much salt, which I learned later that can act as a diuretic. And so I was basically stopping on the side of the trail with diarrhea for like every mile or 2 miles from Michigan Bluff to the river. And so I just spent like, it was like one that was stoppage time of like a couple minutes every 10 minutes of like just like not moving. But then that also dehydrated me and put me behind on calories. And then once I was behind, it was really hard to get back on it. So basically like I was perfect through Michigan Bluff. And then like that started to happen between Michigan Bluff and Forest Hill. And then I ended up basically just like walking 50% or more of the time between miles 60 to 90 because I was either stopped or because I like just couldn't get food in as a consequence of that happening. So that meant that walking 50% of that cost me 2 or 3 hours. So I still finished okay in like 1850. Yeah. But that, I would have run 3 hours faster and run more like 16 hours if I hadn't had that happen. So I think my lesson learned from that is like, we collectively as a ultra running and running in the heat community have figured out how to heat train and how to cool off really effectively. And so I've heard similar anecdotes from some other runners. I think there was a top 10 woman who had a similar issue.
Okay.
But like if you're heat trained and you're like cooling yourself off effectively during the race, then you're actually comfortable and you don't have to overcompensate in terms of salt and nutrition and other things. You can kind of just like do what you normally do. And I
Interesting.
wasn't confident in that. And I didn't think that that was true. I was like, if I'm going to err on the side of not enough salt or too much salt, then I'm going to go too much. And so at Dusty Corners, like mile 37, I drank most of a bottle of Scratch hyperhydration, which is like 1,800 milligrams of sodium. And so I like had that in one serving basically. And I didn't need that. Like I was already taking in like my normal amount of salt, and that was just like supplemental extra. And so I paid for that.
So this time around, if I'm understanding this correctly, you are in full confidence that you can run the 100-mile distance, especially on that course. And it just comes down to making a really slight nutrition tweak and trusting that your topical cooling methods are going to be fine, and you can just take a baseline amount of sodium in your diet. Is that about correct?
I think so. Like I still ran well and hard for the last hour of Western States, like the last 6 miles. Like my legs were still strong and I could still run the uphills hard and things. I just like didn't have the energy from the nutrition and things. And so hopefully I can like figure that out and get it right at Western States. And I feel like Javelina was a little bit of a test of that. Like I had to do some cooling strategies, and I just went with like baseline nutrition plan and did my heat training beforehand and like cooling during the race, but just like didn't modify or do anything different or extra during the race, and tested that would work, and it did. So it'd be great if that could work for like a couple more hours of Western States this time.
So obviously you returned to Javelina with the intention to get another golden ticket to get into Western. I'm curious why you chose Javelina versus the other golden ticket options. Was it to have a larger runway in terms of training for Western, like 8 to 9 months, or was it another reason?
I suppose there's not a long list of golden ticket races. I was like totally satisfied with Bandera, and so I'm happy to leave that there and be like, sweet, I like did well. I can just be happy with it and don't need to ruin that. I think Black Canyon actually appeals to me the most of any of the golden ticket races, because like I like downhills, and it's I don't know, that race just appeals to me the most. But I do feel like I need to get good at hundreds. You have to run hundreds. And I hadn't figured it out. Like I'd done Run Rabbit and Western States, and I hadn't figured out the nutrition or done as well as I wanted to at those races. And Javelina, like it's 100 miles, but in terms of time, it's like, a bridge, like halfway between 100K and 100 mile. And so it was just like an extension of 100K. And so if I could figure that out, then maybe that helps me actually figure out 100 miles. And then that'll help me for 100 miles at Leadville or at Western States, or like a longer, harder 100 miler. So like I needed the practice of running hundreds. Javelina is like a great bridge for that. And so that was the primary motivation, to prove to myself that I can do 100 and like learn something and get better at it.
Javelina's a hot race. Did you end up nailing the combination of topical cooling there, or just your general cooling system combined with sodium and fluid intake?
I think so. Yeah, I didn't have any problems with it. I think the one part of the race that I felt worried was like halfway around the third loop of Javelina. The longest stretch between aid stations is like the second section of each loop, basically getting to halfway is like 50 or 55 minutes. And on the third lap, that's also like when it's getting pretty warm. And that longest section from Coyote Camp to Jackass Junction, towards the end of that, and it's like slightly uphill and takes longer, I was feeling my worst that I felt during the race. And so I was worried that, oh no, I'm like, I don't know what this is going to mean for later on. And I think it was that I was a little bit hot, because as soon as I dunked myself in water at Jackass Junction again, it's like, oh, okay, I totally have like way more energy and I feel great again. So that was the one moment, but like where I felt like I maybe was overheated a little bit, but otherwise felt like I pretty much had figured it out.
I'm curious how the rest of the race went from an execution standpoint. Like, were there any interesting moments going back and forth with Arlen or Dakota? Like, I think if I remember correctly, on that last lap, you and Dakota were relatively neck and neck. So, I mean, we can start earlier than that, but what were some of the interesting moments and takeaways for you?
Yeah, the first couple laps were not that interesting, I suppose. They just kind of like passed by with more people around on the first lap, and then it slowly spreading out on the second lap. But basically, like being within a minute or two of expected times, doing some talking to the other runners in the first loop, especially, but not a ton of chatting. Everyone being pretty focused, but those cruised by pretty quickly. With the people that I expected to be around being the ones that were around. I felt like it was like there are some big names in the race, and so everyone was paying attention to them, but there's also a long list of people like right below them or that haven't had like a great 100-mile performance or something. And like, you never know, like someone can come out of nowhere for sure and win the whole thing. No problem. So I was like looking around to find who that was going to be too. But yeah, I don't know, like most things was like kind of just like according to plan and like just like cruising through for the most part and like basically hitting splits. On the end of the third lap, I just like basically naturally was in second place without having to force it and like asked if there's anyone else in front other than Dakota. It was just Dakota. So on the fourth loop, on that climb to Jackass Junction, I did see him off in the distance. I took one split where he was like going up a hill and I was coming down on the entry to it and saw that he was 90 seconds ahead on that split at like mile 65 or so. So I was like, okay, he's like within sight. That's cool. I'm still like holding back and not trying to do anything special. And I think he probably took a little bit more time on me the rest of that climb to like the halfway point of loop 4, because the couple other runners I was passing were starting to tell me, hey, he's right in front of you. He's like 3 minutes ahead. He's like right there. So maybe he gained a little bit. But then on the descent out of Jackass Junction, like the end of loop 4, by the time I got to like the third aid station of the loop, mile 75, he came back into sight again. And I was like just checking my watch occasionally, just like noticing the distance between us getting shorter and shorter, not forcing that to happen, but it sort of happening. And then I like looked down or just like stopped looking up for like a couple minutes. And as soon as I looked up, like Dakota was peeing behind a bush and he turned around and looked at me and I was like, oh, I guess I just passed you. And I'm in first place now. And so that was like a half a mile from Javelina headquarters. And so I like had passed him right there. He like hopped right back on the trail and like on my heels, like right behind me, like attached himself to me.
It's fine. I wanted to bring something up.
Yeah.
There were some people in the chat that thought that move by Dakota was intentional, that he preferred to be chasing as opposed to leading at that point in the race, that it was like a psychological easement and he could just get into a rhythm better. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it was the chat was very lively about that strategic move because they could all see it on the drone shots. It was very interesting.
I heard that, and it's definitely going through my head right now. And maybe I have something to learn about, like competing for 100 miles or really for any running race. Because coming into this, like I still think of 100-mile or any other trail race as like a series of independent time trials. And so like, I'm going to do whatever gets me to the finish line fastest. And if anyone else is doing any kind of tactics to like surge or do something else, like that's not going to help them get to the finish line faster. Like they're hurting themselves by doing that. And the only reason that they're going to get ahead or benefit from doing that is if it hurts me more.
Yeah.
And if I just don't respond or don't follow it, then like I'm going to get to the finish line faster. And it doesn't make any sense to do any race tactics. Like that's silly. Like you're just hurting yourself. Like why would you do that? But maybe in this instance, like he did something that worked. And there's definitely some human psychology. Like you can get benefits of like running with other people. And yeah. I'm not like people being super social runners and having other people around them, giving them a huge boost and letting them run fast. But when I passed Dakota, he lashed himself like right behind me. We ran together for like 5 minutes to come into headquarters. He was slightly faster in the aid station, and so like he ran out while I was like putting my last like gel in my pocket.
Yeah.
And and like after that, he just like threw down. So as soon as I like caught him, he just like dropped some like super fast miles, dropped me pretty quickly. And on the last lap, I was trying really hard the whole time, but I never saw him again. So maybe there was some kind of strategy there where like for him, it was like a huge mental like motivator to have someone get him and then go. And maybe if I'm putting myself in his place, like having someone catch me, I don't know. I guess I've never had someone catch me while I feel okay. It's always been like, oh darn, like I'm feeling sad right now, and like good for them, and I'm not going to be able to keep up. But maybe I'm hoping I can learn from what Dakota did and be like, okay, someone's going to pass me. I'm just going to like attach myself to them. And so maybe from my perspective, like, I was struggling with this a little bit because I was like gaining on him slowly over like the 5 mile entry to that end of the loop. And I was like, all right, people are like, you got to pass with authority. Like you should just like run by fast so he can't attach himself to you. And like, or alternatively, should I sort of like kill some time and wait until the beginning of the next loop to pass him? Or do I want to do it at the aid station? But I like struggled with that decision a little bit. And ultimately my answer was like, just keep doing what I'm doing and do what gets me to the finish line fastest, because that's probably what's going to be the best end result. But I think there probably was some kind of race tactic or strategy that I could have done that would have helped me, but I didn't know what to do other than like just keep running at the same pace that I was running at. But yeah, Dakota definitely saw me and was either spooked or motivated enough that he just threw down like a super fast last lap and dropped me.
I think you guys both had super strong finishes from Jackass to the finish. And I think I'd have to go back and look at your splits and his splits. I think he ran like 63 minutes from Jackass to the finish, which is mostly downhill, but there are some inconveniently placed, rollers in there. And he must have been running 6:30 pace on average. It was insane.
Yeah, so fast. Yeah, I looked at my lap splits compared to, well, when Pat Reagan ran the course record, he didn't run a super even pace. Like he went pretty fast at the beginning and he didn't run as great of a last lap. But I ran like several minutes faster than Pat Reagan's last lap.
Yeah.
And Dakota beat me by 7 minutes just on that one last lap. So like he was cooking. It was crazy.
Well, to kind of sum up the conversation on Javelina, do you have for anyone out there that's listening that wants to compete at a high level at this race in future years, they're going for a golden ticket, etc. Are there any lessons from this race or just field notes you have that you think other people could take and use to their benefit?
I felt like I was envisioning lots of the training runs that I had done in the lead up to the race. So I think the training that I did was usefully race specific. Like I was doing toughness workouts more than speed workouts. Like I did a series of 5K, 10K repeat kind of things. And the culmination of was like a 3x10K workout. Okay. And that's definitely not a workout where you're going to run super fast the whole time, but you're trying to. And that's definitely a mental toughness workout of like, you just like have to keep pushing, and it's like monotonous and nothing really changes. And you're still in that same kind of place where you're hanging on, but still pushing. And so I thought those toughness workouts were really useful. And then I also did this one weird weekend where I did 6 2-hour runs, like, but scattered throughout the weekend. So I ran Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon.
Wow.
And they were all just like 2-hour runs at like kind of like everyday endurance pace. But that by splitting up my big weekend long run into those chunks, it meant that I ran all of the miles faster and was like rested in between. But it also like, I think taught my brain to reset really well for like a 2 to 3 hour time frame. And so like doing loops on Javelina, just like it felt so easy to split them up and run the loop that I was running in rather than like be worried about loop 4 when I was on loop 2. I was just like, that was pretty direct practice of just like going out and running for 2 to 3 hours and like just worrying about that run rather than the other ones that I was doing around it.
That's absolutely fascinating. Are you mostly public on Strava? Do you put all your training on there?
Yeah, you could look up that weekend.
I'll make sure to link to it in the show notes.
I think that was the biggest. Like I've done 20-hour training weeks before, but only like with mountain running kind of stuff. And then that was a 20-hour week where it was all flat, like the same as Javelina kind of terrain, and ended up going over 150 miles. And like that number was just like so scary big to me. But most of it was concentrated in that one weekend where I did like almost 100 miles in the 12 hours.
Do you, given that you have a full-time job and it sounds like it's intellectually stimulating, et cetera, do you struggle to incorporate the amount of training you feel like you need to compete at a high level, or are you pretty good at prioritizing and getting the work done?
Yeah, I got to make sacrifices in some places. I'm like grateful that I have a couple of training partners in Boulder who are willing to wake up and like run at 5 or 5:30 in the morning and like do some hard workouts. Seth Wheeling and Hillary Allen will both like get up early and run with me. But yeah, I got it. Like my daily routine is like get up and run for a couple hours, do a work day, and then like after 5 p.m. I just like commute home, cook some dinner, walk the dogs, and then like get ready for bed, and that's it. So I like don't have a ton of social time for the most part. So I feel like this week and next week I got to take advantage of the extra time that I have and make sure I'm maintaining some relationships because I don't always have time for them. But yeah, it's gone through waves. I feel like with like, I guess over years become more and more natural, and like I'm more capable of handling that much training without needing like a midday nap or something, which I have taken during the workday before and then like tried to make up later on. But yeah, it's definitely setting priorities and like understanding that different times of the week and of the year are for different focus points.
I don't know. Well, there's this famous Scott Jurek story about his preparation for Western States, and I'm probably going to butcher it a little bit, but year after year in that 6-year stretch they did Western, he did this series of 30-mile, 40-mile, 30-mile, 30-mile runs in the Western Cascades of Seattle. And if he could complete that 4-day, 120-mile stretch, like 3 weeks out from Western, he declared himself ready to win. And your 6 by 2 hour weekend campaign there kind of reminded me of that. That was like the checkbox for Javelina. I can do the loops.
Yeah. And the training can definitely be concentrated. Like I do way more on the weekends than like some other pro runners who can spread it out throughout the week. And so I think the concentrated training camp style of training is effective.
One of the last questions I have for you, what do the next 6 to 8 months look like for you? You obviously have an extended period of time, or at least more time than you had post Bandera to get ready for this race. Are you going to incorporate any smaller races into the mix in the lead up, or what's going to happen?
I'll definitely do some small local races between now and Western States, but I think I am actually interested in like having some sponsorship conversations and maybe talking to those companies about what their priorities would be. And so that could influence my race schedule next year. So I definitely haven't set anything in stone. So I definitely don't know yet until some of those conversations have been had. But I plan to do some more strength training in the off season. 2 winters ago, me and Hillary were going to the track and pretending to run fast on loops on the Manhattan Middle School track. And so I'll probably get back to doing some of that throughout the winter as well. But yeah, don't know about other races other than Western right now.
Is there anything else besides the strength training that you could see yourself doing differently in the primary portion of the training block, like in April and May of next year? Or do you feel like you kind of nailed it last time around and it's just a matter of switching up that nutrition piece?
Yeah, I don't think I have to do anything too different. I guess just for fun, I want to play some pickup basketball. So that's what I'll be doing with some coworkers, like sometime this weekend or next weekend.
I love it. I love it. Well, man, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. We'll make sure to link to your Strava in the show notes, and offline, if there's any other links you want me to add in there, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, we can't wait to watch your race unfold at Western. I know it's many months away, but it's still exciting. And yeah, any other thoughts, or do you want to leave the audience with anything before we go?
It's a fun time to be trying to rise in the sport amongst a set of peers. I feel like I've got some great support systems from both local and other runners. Like I got pre-race texts from Jeff Colt and Tyler Fox, and I still reflect a lot on Jeff Colt at the end of Western States at the award ceremony, standing around and being like, man, I feel like I'm just like in this moment racing against my generation of ultra runners. And I feel now that I've finally gotten to the point where like I can consider myself amongst this generation of ultra runners, and like it's really fun to be in that and part of the group, and we're all trying to push the sport forward, and that's really fun.